Mm. All right, Tim, let's shift our focus to the game this weekend with Penn State. Um, what are you hearing? I guess this is still sort of a recruiting question, but what are you hearing about the contact between James Franklin and maybe some current Penn State players, his former players, as well as it seems like there's been a lot of outreach to staff members, which is not tampering. Um, that he's reached out to former Penn State staffers as well. Like, how much do you think that impacts this game tomorrow?
I'm very interested how much it does, just because I've seen a lot of the movement so far has been behind the scenes. A lot of the like recruiting staffers and hey, like behind the scenes, like straight prevent like just random personnel people within Penn State's department are now in Blacksburg. Like they've already just quietly disappeared off Penn State's athletics website and staffing website, are now on Virginia Tech's. And obviously there is some of those conversations ongoing behind the scenes with some of those players. So I think the timing of all of this is very fascinating. I wasn't sure going into the week, if or at least going into the bye week, if James Franklin would have a destination set by the time this game happened.
Mhm.
When Virginia Tech kind of put that pressure over the weekend, and then obviously, he got announced early this week. Yeah, like I think that changes some things in that locker room. I think there's some people in there that, might be a little distracted because they've got their attention turned to, getting down to Blacksburg and their future in Blacksburg versus, what is on the table now at Penn State. Because again, they're fighting. The whole goal has been rallying together to rectify this season and fight for a bowl game, fight for a bowl appearance. If a lot of these guys, not a lot of, but if there's guys in this too deep that are going to be following James Franklin to Blacksburg, I don't know how many of those guys, how much of an incentive is now to go, earn a bowl game they're not probably going to be participating in.
Tim, when you look at what Penn State has been through this season, just in Big Ten play, and obviously the Vegas spread, all that has been the long conversation this week. What I've been most interested in the past 24 hours is how people have not given Nebraska the credit for winning close games, but give Penn State credit for losing close games. Do you think that that's part of this conversation for this game, that if it's a close one, Nebraska probably should actually be given the favor in that?
Maybe, but I like sure, but like at the same time, it's. I think what I've written about this game all game is you toss the records out a little bit just because of what the talent looks like. This is a Penn State team that across the board coming into the year on paper and what we saw these last 2 weeks. I think across the roster, you can make the argument is a more talented roster than Nebraska. I don't even think it's an argument. I think it's just kind of fact. And that's where like, hey, this is a team that they struggled early on this year for a variety of different reasons. They faltered. They have completely. It's a program that's been their season completely derailed. That said, they've rallied behind one another. They've rallied around each other. They're playing like a team that has a bunch of 4 and 5 star prospects, and they're a team that is again quietly tested. They've been in these big moments. They made the college football playoff last year. They made a run in the college football playoff last year. So this is the team that, again, if we're talking, it's Saturday evening and it's the third quarter and it's a close game between these two teams. I don't think Nebraska is necessarily better positioned to handle that moment, but this year, this season alone, they have been. Is that going to actually impact the outcome Saturday evening? Maybe not, because the leaders of this Penn State team have stepped up, and the guys that have stepped up as leaders are guys that have been trialed and tested in these big moments, in these late game situations, and know how to attack these moments.
Tim, we've talked a lot about the talent gap or perceived talent gap a lot this week between Penn State and Nebraska. One of our friends over at Matrix Analytical has told us they've got Penn State at 14th nationally. They've got Nebraska 23rd. Some of the recruiting sites that put out these rankings have Penn State at 10th, Nebraska at 20th, about the same gap, 9 or 10 spots. Do you think the way we talk about Penn State's talent versus Nebraska talent reflect that, I think, relatively close gap in talent? Or do you think we have been talking about Penn State as greater than that? And if so, why?
I don't think it's a matter of greater than. I think it's just where the advantage is somewhat sizable. Like the
Okay.
gap between like, hey, Danny Deadness Sutton and Nebraska's best edge rusher. is pretty sizable, and like, I mean, Nebraska would love to have a running back duo like Nicholas Singleton and Katrin Allen, and that receiver room is pretty talented. I think obviously Nebraska, would probably have the edge in terms of receiver talent. Offensive line, I think you give the edge to Penn State. Defensive depth, I think you give the edge to Penn State. I think it's not the fact that I think, again, 1-for-1, if you looked across the two deep, I think it's relatively close. But when you sum up all of it and you look at, this overall DB room compared Nebraska's overall DB room compared to Penn State's overall DB room and the linebacker room and so on and so forth, it's like you look at the overall broad brush of talent and the depth and what you will need. Like, again, to win this game, I think both teams are going to need to call on some depth. And when you look at that, the better depth is coming on Penn State's end.
Who do you think has the better option as their backup quarterback or current starting quarterback?
I think the better pound for pound talent wise, I think maybe you could give Grunkemeyer the edge. I think in terms of what the offense wants them to do and what they need to do to win the game, I think you could give the edge to TJ Lateef, in my opinion.
Where do you see the biggest talent gap then? Because I mean, if that has been the conversation between Penn State and Nebraska so far, and if that is what the 10.5 point spread was when it opened, do you see one significant part of Penn State's roster that is so much further ahead than Nebraska's?
I think their front seven is better than Nebraska's front seven, like sizably. I think the way they played specifically these last few weeks, I think. And then again, Nebraska secondary has played at a very high level, but I think I do like some of the secondary members of, or some of the members of Penn State's secondary, like a whole lot. Like, again, it's a difference between, I think Nebraska's secondary, there's NFL talent that's playing together at a very high level. I think Penn State's secondary is littered with NFL guys.
That is our guy, Tim Verghese from inside Nebraska. Tim, how do you think the game goes this weekend?
I have Nebraska just like losing in short, like just like it's going to be just, but I think it's close. I think it's very close. And I think ultimately what favors Penn State for me is what I still anticipate to be a pretty raucous road environment, a pretty, Nebraska's walking into enemy territory, essentially. I think that's what gives Penn State the edge, but I think it's going to be a very close game. I do still have Nebraska getting to 8 wins. I just think it happens next week, not this week.
There you go. That is Tim Verghese from inside Nebraska. Tim, appreciate the time. As always, great stuff. We'll talk to you next week.
Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Tim.
That is Tim Verghese. For what it's worth.
Was that your least favorite Tim segment?
Just the last part. But no, I understand his point that there's certain places where I think there's certain places where the matchups might favor Penn State more than the overall talent.
And I can also see from his perspective as like a talent evaluator.
So that's the other thing.
Where you can see that. I can't argue that perspective of it.
But I also, and I didn't bring this up because I don't need to belabor the point, but obviously that talent hasn't played to their talent level this year.
And that was the point that I was making too. They lost their first 6 Big Ten games. And yeah, some of them were by 1 or 3 points, but I'm pretty sure if you don't score more than the other team, you still lose the game, right?
And also 3 common opponents in Nebraska, 1-2 versus 3-0.
Yeah.
So that's my other point. So I do understand his perspective as a talent evaluator, as a recruiting guy. That totally makes sense. I also think that the way they've played this year, they haven't played like 4 and 5 stars for the most part. I don't think. I will say, you know what the line is as of this morning?
6.5?
Down to 7.5. I said between 6.5 and 7.5 before game time. We're trending in that direction. See where it goes.
You know, so people keep saying, and I even referenced it earlier, it opened at 10.5. It opened on Sunday. A week ago before Penn State had a win, it was 7.5. And then they beat Michigan State, and then it was 10.5 on Sunday morning.
Which Michigan State famously not good.
Yeah, so how does beating Michigan State get you 3 points over a team that Nebraska, I mean,
I don't know.
So people poured their money into Penn State for whatever reason. So
yeah, and I think that that's coming on down. I think it's 6.5 before kickoff. I said earlier in the week I said between 6.5 and 7.5. Obviously we've gotten to the 7.5. I think it's somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 6.5 by kickoff.
Now, 4 weeks ago, I don't know what the line or spread would have been or anything like that, but Nebraska would have been the team that had all the distractions, right? If they had a similar record.
4 weeks ago, Penn State 10.5 makes more sense because they hadn't lost 6 games in a row at that point. Obviously, I know they got the win against Michigan State, but they were sort of in that. That was right on the I think right around the time they fired Franklin. So if you had done it before Franklin got fired, 10.5 makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Basically, at any point since Franklin has gotten fired, I don't think 10.5 ever made sense to me. Like at all.
But of course, then they're like, oh, well, look, they lost by 1 to Iowa and they lost by,
Cool.
one score to Indiana.
Iowa 6-4.
Yeah.
Like Iowa 6-4.
Receiving votes.
Cool.
In case people.
Nebraska's receiving votes in the coaches poll. Did you see that?
I did.
Like, so what are we talking about?
I know.
Like, Iowa is a team that Nebraska is going to struggle with. They always do. But we can't act like Iowa is this big, scary version of themselves this year. They're not.
I also just hate the narrative too, that it's always, and we have this like sheep mentality sometimes, just like as Husker fans, that we look at across the opposing side and we're scarred and we're burned from, experiences of past and whatnot. But why can't Nebraska have put some fear into the opposing team, right? Like what TJ Lateef did against UCLA, and then we have a bye week to get more healthy and everything. Like there's no version of a Penn State fan that's not going to Happy Valley, that's going to stay at home and watch the game in Harrisburg or wherever, that they're just going to be, they're not worried about what Lateef could do to them on the road. And Iowa's the same thing. They didn't watch any of the Nebraska games and just go, oh, wow. Like
that quarterback.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, I hope Gronowski doesn't have to drop back to pass against a top 10 rated pass defense in Nebraska.
Yeah.
But instead we always accept the mentality of, well, it's what other teams can do to us. That's why we're afraid. We always think of ways that Nebraska will lose instead of ways that Nebraska is advantageous and can take the win.
Yeah,
which, absolutely. I mean, when I look at the Penn State game, I keep going back to the same result, but Nebraska's played in close games. They have that DNA finally that's coming back that we've been begging for them to have for 5 or 6 years. And now they have a chance to prove it on the road in a hostile environment, however hostile it's going to be.
Still don't know that I'm buying that.
But still, I just don't understand the sheep mentality that sometimes we as a collective, as Nebraska fans, can have as the group. And just say, oh, well, we're 10.5 point underdogs, so clearly they're more talented, or clearly it's all this other stuff.
Here's what I know. Both Penn State and Iowa will have an opportunity to hurt Nebraska in the run game.
100%.
Now, I do think Gronowski maybe is a little more dangerous in terms of the unscripted QB runs than Grunkemeyer is. I haven't been impressed with his legs so far this year. They may try and make that a part of their attack just because Nebraska struggled with it. But I do understand that you have the concerns with the rushing game. I also understand that I don't think either of those guys can beat you with his arm.
Yeah,
that gives Nebraska an opportunity to, and I don't know if they will or not, right? Because they didn't
against Bryce Underwood.
They didn't against Michigan, and it frustrated me.
Yep.
Right? They're going to have an opportunity to load up against the run in a way that they haven't been able to against Nico or Jin Mayava or Brennan Sorsby or even Aiden Childs or Malik Washington, all guys who are better throwers of the football than Mark Gronowski and Ethan Grunkemeyer. Like you have an opportunity here. I get that they do some things that Nebraska hasn't been as good at this year. Although, again, I think the running back run game struggles, while it's not as bad as we think it is. The thing that has really, really hurt Nebraska, I did the math yesterday while for what it's worth. If you take out all QB run stats from Nebraska's team this year, that includes some negatives, right? So I added yards back into some teams' totals,
right,
and I took out all negative team rushing yards. So that is botched snaps, things like that, which that added quite a bit to several of these teams as well. Nebraska's giving up 132 yards rushing a game. That takes off about 35 rushing yards from their total a game. That is, like, if you look at that on the surface and you're like, hey, if I don't think this guy's beating me with unscripted runs, I can look at that and I go, well, Nebraska can win a game giving up 132 yards a game.
Yeah.
Like, that's definitely on the table. Now, if they give up 232 yards, which was pretty close to the number they gave up against like Michigan, who also had QB run game, by the way, but whatever. That's a problem, right? If Nebraska can continue to keep teams in that like 300 to 350 yards of total offense, I think they've got a really good shot against Penn State.
Yeah.
Like that's the number they haven't given up 400 yards of total offense all year. That's the number that's a winnable number. 300 yards of total offense is a winnable number on defense. They're bringing up 19, 20 points a game. That's a winnable number on defense, right?
Penn State's currently averaging 325 yards per game.
Rushing?
Total.
Just total.
Yep.
Right. So if you can keep them.
Can you imagine what that's ranked in the country?
It's not good. It is 87th.
109th.
Oh, God, that's bad.
It's very bad.
So you take that, and it's split pretty evenly, if I remember. I think it's like 160-ish rushing and like 160-ish passing. I might have that off a little bit, but it's pretty evenly split. I know it's less than 200 yards passing a game.
Yeah, yards rushing is 151.7, so 152, and then passing is 173.
Yeah, so like basically one. I mean,
pretty much, yeah.
So basically split down the middle there. So I look at that and I go, okay, if they can keep Penn State to their averages, probably, if I had to guess, it would be slightly below their average on passing yards, maybe slightly above their average in rushing yards. Nebraska can win that game.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's Nebraska can win that game. So I get that there might be some matchups here that we don't love for Nebraska, and we'll get into maybe some keys to the game here in a second. But I don't look at this as, oh, they're going to run for 300 yards on Nebraska. Maybe they will.
Yep.
But I also know if you have they have an opportunity to say, hey, Ethan, beat us with your arm.
Right.
Good luck.
Mm-hmm.
Like, good luck. I don't know if they'll do that or not, but that's an opportunity they have. They have an opportunity next week, literally a week from today, to say, hey, Mark Gronowski, throw it as many times as you want.
Yeah.
Go for it, bud. We'll see how it goes.
If Grunkmeyer and Gronowski both have 40 passing attempts, you feel pretty good, right?
If they have 25 passing attempts, I think.
Yeah.
You feel really good about how that game went.
Yeah.
And if they have 25 passing attempts or more and they beat you, well done.
Yeah.
Well done. Tip of the cap. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing we say all the time with certain defenses. Greg McDermott does this a lot, right? Where it's, hey, if you can make 40 mid-range jumpers and beat Creighton that way, congrats, you win. Like, well done. That's how we're going to play it. You're going to have an opportunity to shoot those all you want. That's how I think Nebraska needs to play this. Gronowski and Grunkmeyer, throw the ball all you want.
The two Gs.
Have fun.
Yeah.
We'll see if they move in silence like lasagna.